Cleaning out the dusty attic of her newly inherited Savannah home, Ellie discovered a hidden box of unsent love letters from a soldier fighting overseas decades ago, addressed to a woman who never lived there. Who were these secret lovers, and why were their letters hidden away? Unraveling the mystery unlocks a heartbreaking story of sacrifice, forbidden love, and a secret that echoes through the old house's walls. What secrets lie hidden in these forgotten letters? Tell us which city you're watching from. Hit like if you love uncovering historical mysteries, and subscribe so you don't miss the heartbreaking revelation. Let's step into the humid air and history of Savannah. The humid Savannah air, thick with the scent of jasmine, Spanish moss, and the faint, briny tang of the nearby river, felt both welcoming and heavy with history as Eleanor Ellie Vance wrestled with the stubborn lock on the front door of the old house. It had been her great-aunt Clara's house, left to Ellie unexpectedly after Clara passed away peacefully at the ripe old age of 98, just a few months prior. Ellie, a freelance graphic designer currently living a nomadic life between projects and cities, hadn't known great-aunt Clara well. She remembered childhood visits filled with the scent of lavender sachets, delicate porcelain teacups, and Clara's quiet, almost ethereal presence. The inheritance, this tall, slightly faded but undeniably elegant three-story townhouse tucked away on a quiet oak-lined square in Savannah's historic district, was a complete surprise, a tangible link to a family history Ellie knew embarrassingly little about. Now, armed with a box of cleaning supplies and a healthy dose of trepidation, she was facing the daunting task of sorting through decades, perhaps even a century, of accumulated possessions, memories, and dust. The key finally turned with a reluctant groan, and the heavy wooden door swung inward, releasing a sigh of cool, stale air that smelled of old wood, beeswax, and time itself. Stepping inside felt like stepping back 50 years. Sunlight filtered through the tall, wavy glass windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Furniture draped in white sheets stood like silent ghosts in the high-ceilinged rooms. Oriental rugs, faded but still intricate, covered dark hardwood floors. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of Ellie's sneakers on the floorboards and the distant chime of a grandfather clock somewhere deeper within the house. Ellie spent the first few days just getting acquainted with the space, opening windows to let in fresh air, tentatively exploring the downstairs rooms, the formal parlor, the dining room with its heavy mahogany table, the slightly outdated but functional kitchen. It was clear great-aunt Clara had lived a quiet, orderly life here for many, many years. There were few personal photographs displayed, mostly landscapes, or still lifes, and the bookshelves held classics, poetry, and local history rather than contemporary novels. It felt like the home of someone intensely private, someone who kept their inner life carefully guarded. The real challenge, Ellie knew, lay upstairs, and particularly in the attic. Mr. Henderson, the friendly, elderly neighbor from across the square, who had offered unsolicited but welcome advice on everything from navigating Savannah's parking rules to dealing with palmetto bugs, had warned her about it. Clara never threw anything away, bless her heart, he'd chuckled, leaning on his garden gate. That attic's likely a time capsule. Might find anything up there, from Civil War buttons to disco balls. On the third day, fueled by strong coffee and a sense of both duty and morbid curiosity, Ellie tackled the attic stairs. They were narrow, steep, hidden behind a small door off the second-floor landing. Cobwebs draped the entrance like macabre decorations. Armed with a flashlight, Ellie cautiously ascended into the hot, stuffy darkness above. The attic was vast, stretching the full length of the house, dimly lit by a single bare bulb hanging from a rafter, and the faint light filtering through a grimy arched window at one end. It smelled strongly of dust, dry wood, and forgotten things. Shapes loomed in the gloom, old steamer trunks, stacked cardboard boxes tied with fraying twine, furniture shrouded in white sheets like misshapen ghosts, dressmakers' dummies standing, sentinel discarded picture frames leaning against the rafters. It was exactly the time capsule Mr. Henderson had described. Ellie let out a low whistle. Sorting through this would take weeks, maybe months. She decided to start in one corner, methodically opening boxes, peering into trunks. She found predictable attic treasures, bundles of old letters tied with ribbon, mostly mundane family correspondence from what she could tell, stacks of yellowed newspapers, outdated clothing smelling faintly of mothballs, chipped porcelain, dolls with vacant stares, photo albums filled with stiffly posed, sepia-toned ancestors she didn't recognize. It was late in the afternoon, the light fading outside the grimy attic window, when she noticed it. Tucked away in the darkest corner, behind a large humpbacked steamer trunk, and beneath a pile of moth-eaten wool blankets, was a small, unassuming wooden box. It wasn't particularly large, maybe the size of a shoebox, made of plain, dark wood, slightly warped with age, with simple brass hinges and a small tarnished latch. It didn't look like it belonged with the other, more ornate trunks and hat boxes. It looked hidden. Curiosity piqued, Ellie carefully pulled the box out from its hiding place, wiping away a thick layer of dust and cobwebs from the lid. The latch wasn't locked. She lifted it, the hinges creaking softly in the attic's silence, and raised the lid. Inside, nestled tightly together, lay a thick stack of letters, dozens of them. The envelopes were brittle, yellowed with age, addressed in a strong, masculine, slightly slanted handwriting using dark ink that had faded but remained legible. They were addressed to Miss Clara Beaumont, 17 Willow Oak Square, Savannah, Georgia, USA. Ellie frowned. Clara Beaumont? Her great-aunt Clara's maiden name had been Weatherly. She had married briefly, long ago, but her husband's name wasn't Beaumont. And while this was 17 Willow Oak Square, the house had belonged to the Weatherly family for generations, before Clara inherited it as the last surviving member. Who was Clara Beaumont? Had she rented a room here long ago, or was it just a coincidence of name and address? More puzzlingly, none of the letters appeared to have been mailed. There were no stamps, no postmarks. The return addresses on the back flap of each envelope were simply military designations, APO numbers, unit identifiers, clearly indicating they came from a soldier serving overseas. The dates on the few envelopes Ellie could see, without disturbing the fragile stack, ranged from 1943 to late 1944, World War II. Her heart began to beat a little faster. Unsent letters from a soldier during wartime, addressed to a woman who seemingly hadn't lived in this house, hidden away in the attic for nearly 80 years. This felt different from the mundane family correspondence she'd found earlier. This felt like a secret. Carefully, respectfully, Ellie lifted the top letter from the stack. The envelope was thin, almost translucent with age. She hesitated for only a moment before gently sliding the folded pages out. The paper was brittle, covered in the same strong, slanted handwriting as the address. It began, "My dearest Clara, October 18th, 1943, somewhere in Italy. Forgive the delay in writing, my love, but things have been difficult here. The push north is slow, relentless, through mud and mountains that seem determined to break us. But thoughts of you, of your smile, of the promises we whispered beneath the Spanish moss back home, they are the fuel that keeps me putting one foot in front of the other. I reread your last letter until the paper grew thin. Knowing you wait, knowing you hold on to hope, it's my anchor in this storm. I picture you at 17 Willow Oak Square, perhaps sitting by the window overlooking the square, reading, waiting. Does the big oak tree still stand guard? Does the jasmine still perfume the evening air? Tell me everything is unchanged, Clara. Tell me the world we knew still exists, waiting for my return. I carry your locket always, tucked beneath my uniform. Touching it reminds me what I'm fighting for, why enduring this hell is necessary, to come home to you, to build the life we dreamed of. Don't worry about me, my Clara. Stay safe. Keep hope alive. Write soon. All my love, forever. Thomas Ellie. Read the letter, then read it again, a lump forming in her throat. The raw emotion, the longing, the desperation for connection across continents and battle lines, it was palpable, reaching across the decades. Thomas, the soldier, clearly loved Clara Beaumont deeply, and he believed unequivocally that she lived at this address, 17 Willow Oak Square, waiting for him. But why were the letters here, unsent, hidden in the attic? Who was Clara Beaumont? And what connection, if any, did she have to Ellie's own? Great-aunt Clara Weatherly, the quiet woman who had lived out her long life in this house. Ellie carefully placed the first letter back in its envelope and looked at the stack remaining in the box. Dozens more. A hidden history. A secret love story interrupted, perhaps tragically by war. Or perhaps by something else entirely. She closed the lid of the wooden box, holding it carefully in her hands. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light piercing the attic gloom. The silence felt heavier now, filled with unspoken questions, with the ghosts of Thomas and Clara. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep within her, that she couldn't simply put the box back in its hiding place. She had stumbled upon a mystery woven into the very fabric of this old Savannah house, and she felt an undeniable pull to uncover the truth. Ellie carried the small wooden box down from the hot, dusty attic with the reverence usually reserved for fragile artifacts. Back in the comparative brightness of the second-floor landing, she wiped the remaining grime from the box's surface with the hem of her t-shirt, revealing the plain, dark grain of the wood beneath. It felt strangely heavy, weighted not just by the stack of letters inside, but by the decades of silence and secrets it held. She took it into what had presumably been Great-aunt Clara's bedroom, a room dominated by an elegant, imposing four-poster bed and filled with the lingering scent of lavender. Setting the box carefully on a small antique writing desk near the window, Ellie hesitated. Part of her felt like a voyeur, intruding on a deeply private correspondence never meant for her eyes. But the mystery was too compelling, the unanswered. Questions too loud. Who were Thomas and Clara Beaumont, and why were his letters to her hidden here unsent in Clara Weatherly's attic? With newfound resolve, she sat down and carefully lifted the lid again. She decided against reading them strictly in chronological order, instead choosing envelopes at random from the stack, wanting to get a broader sense of the story they contained. She pulled out another letter, dated January 1944, the paper even, more brittle than the first. "My dearest Clara," Thomas wrote, his handwriting slightly less steady this time, perhaps penned in difficult conditions. "Forgive my scrawl. We're somewhere near Anzio now. The fighting is fierce, doesn't begin to cover it. Mud, rain, noise that never stops. Sleep comes in fits and starts. But even in the worst moments, I close my eyes and picture your face. Imagine walking with you again under the live oaks in Forsyth Park, the Spanish moss dripping like green lace. Do you still walk there sometimes? Does it feel the same without me?" He wrote of the camaraderie among his fellow soldiers. Peterson lost his harmonica again, claims Kowalski hid it. Brief, censored mentions of patrols and danger. Saw, too. Much yesterday, Clara. Things no man should see. And always circling back to her, to Savannah, to their shared hopes. Received your package last week. The knitted socks are saving my feet, and the fudge. Gone in about 5 minutes flat, shared amongst the boys. Miller swore it was the best he ever tasted. Thank you, my love. Knowing you're thinking of me, sending pieces of home, it means more than words can say. Tell me about your days. Are you still volunteering at the hospital library? Are the Beaumonts treating you well? I worry knowing you're there without family close by. Ellie paused. Beaumonts. Plural. So Clara Beaumont wasn't just a name. She was likely living with a family named Beaumont, presumably at this address, 17 Willow Oak Square. And she volunteered. At the hospital library. These were concrete clues, but still, it didn't explain the connection to Ellie's great-aunt Clara Weatherly, or why Thomas seemed convinced Clara Beaumont lived here. She opened another letter, this one dated much later, August 1944, postmarked, in thought as none were sent, from France. The tone was different, tinged with weariness, but also a desperate hope. Clara, my love, it feels like years since I last wrote, though perhaps only weeks have passed. We're pushing through France now. Saw Paris briefly from a distance. Can you imagine? One day, Clara, I promise we'll see it together properly. But the fighting remains heavy. I lost good men this week, friends. His handwriting faltered slightly here. It changes you, this war. I worry sometimes you won't recognize. The man who comes home, But home is the thought that keeps me sane. Home and you. Your letters are my lifeline. The last one, where you mentioned maybe taking that art class at the Telfair. Did you? Please tell me you did. You have such talent, Clara. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Your drawings, and I keep the one you did of the fountain in Forsyth Park tucked inside my helmet liner. It's faded now, but it reminds me of beauty, of peace. Hold on, my love, I feel it in my bones. This war can't last forever. Soon I'll be home. Keep writing to 17 Willow Oak Square. Knowing your letters wait for me there. It's everything. Yours forever, Thomas. An artist? Volunteering at the library? Living with the Beaumonts at this address? Ellie felt a growing sense of connection to this unknown Clara Beaumont, a young woman waiting anxiously during wartime, finding solace perhaps in art, connected by love and letters to a soldier far away. But the core mystery remained. Why were Thomas's letters here unsent? Did Clara Beaumont ever receive any of his letters? Did she move away suddenly? Did something happen to her? Ellie spent the rest of the afternoon carefully reading through more of the letters. They painted a vivid picture of Thomas Ashton, brave, thoughtful, deeply in love, enduring the horrors of war by clinging to the image of the girl waiting for him back in Savannah. He wrote about the mud of Italy, the hedgerows of Normandy, the exhaustion, the fear, the small moments of camaraderie, always anchoring himself with thoughts of Clara and their future. But interspersed with the declarations of love and longing were hints of worry, references to things Clara had mentioned in her missing letters to him. Clara, what did you mean your guardians seemed distracted? Are the Beaumonts all right? From a letter dated March 1944. Please don't worry about the shortages here, my love. Focus on yourself. Your talk of rationing and Mrs. Beaumont being unwell concerns me more. From May 1944. You sounded sad in your last letter, Clara. Is everything truly all right at Willow Oak Square? Don't hesitate to tell me if there are problems. Knowing you're safe is all that matters. From July 1944. A narrative began to emerge, not just of Thomas's experiences, but of potential troubles back home for Clara. Was the Beaumont family facing hardship? Illness? Were they perhaps not the kind guardians Thomas imagined them? To be driven by these new questions, Ellie decided to search the house itself for clues related to the Beaumonts, or this earlier Clara. Her own great-aunt Clara Weatherly had inherited the house relatively late in life after her parents passed. Who lived here during the war years? Had the Weatherlys perhaps rented it out or taken in boarders? She started methodically exploring the downstairs rooms again, paying closer attention this time. In the back of a dusty bookshelf in the formal parlor tucked behind rows of untouched classics, she found several very old photo albums. These seemed different from the ones in the attic, perhaps belonging to an earlier generation. She carefully opened one. The black paper pages were brittle, the photos secured with faded corner holders. There were stiff family portraits from the early 1900s. Ellie recognized her great-grandparents from other family pictures. But then, turning a page, she saw photos clearly dated from the 1940s. Young men in uniform, women with wartime hairstyles and determined smiles, working in factories or rolling bandages. And then she saw her, a black and white photograph of a young woman, perhaps 17 or 18, with warm, intelligent eyes and soft brown hair, styled in gentle waves, remarkably similar to the miniature portrait in the music box from the previous story. Wait, wrong story. This young woman had warm brown eyes and soft brown hair styled in gentle waves. She stood smiling hesitantly beside Ellie's great-grandmother, Elizabeth Weatherly, on the front steps of 17 Willow Oak Square. The resemblance to the vague image Ellie had formed of Clara Beaumont was striking. Could this be her? Beneath the photo, written in faded white ink, was a simple caption: Elizabeth with Clara B., summer 1943. Clara B., Clara Beaumont. Living. Here with Ellie's great-grandparents, the Weatherlys. Not the Beaumonts. Thomas had it wrong, or perhaps Clara had deliberately misled him. Why? Ellie's mind raced. If Clara Beaumont lived here with the Weatherlys, why did Thomas keep mentioning the Beaumonts as her guardians? And who were they? She scanned the other photos from that era. There were several more featuring Clara B., sometimes alone, sometimes with Ellie's great-grandmother, sometimes posing with other young women, likely friends. In one photo, Clara held a sketchbook, confirming Thomas's mention of her artistic talent, but there were no photos of anyone who looked like they could be Mr. or Mrs. Beaumont. Ellie turned her attention to the house itself. Great-aunt Clara had kept meticulous records according to the executor of the will. Perhaps there were old household ledgers, address books, or diaries stored somewhere downstairs. In the bottom drawer of the heavy mahogany desk in the small downstairs study, beneath stacks of old tax returns and property deeds, Ellie found what she was looking for: several old cloth-bound ledgers and diaries belonging to her great-grandmother, Elizabeth Weatherly. Heart-pounding, she opened the one dated 1943. Elizabeth Weatherly's handwriting was neat, precise, detailing household expenses, social engagements, notes about war bond drives, and rationing. Ellie scanned the pages, searching for any mention of Clara B. or the Beaumonts. She found the first reference in April 1943. Clara B. arrived today. Seems a quiet, pleasant girl, though understandably nervous. Hard times for the child, losing both parents so tragically. Hope we can provide her some stability here while her uncle is overseas. Losing both parents? Uncle overseas? This was new information. Ellie kept reading, her eyes flying across the pages. May 1943. Clara received a letter from Thomas A. today, her face lit up like the sun. Young love in wartime. Such a fragile thing. Thomas A. Thomas Ashton. So, her great-grandmother knew about him, knew about the letters Clara was receiving. June 1943. Took Clara to volunteer at the hospital library. Seemed to lift her spirits. She has a good head on her shoulders, that girl. Then later entries began to hint at complications. August 1943. Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont visited today to discuss Clara's trust fund. Seem like grasping sorts. Worry about Clara's inheritance being managed properly while her uncle, her legal guardian, is away fighting. Must keep a closer eye. The Beaumonts. They weren't guardians Clara lived with. They were relatives, perhaps, managing her finances, and Elizabeth Weatherly clearly distrusted them. Had Clara deliberately not told Thomas the truth about her living situation? Perhaps. Not wanting to worry him while he was at war. September 1943. Beaumont's pressing Clara about investing her funds in some venture of theirs. Told her firmly not to sign anything without consulting Uncle John's lawyer upon his return. The Beaumonts were displeased. Such vultures. Ellie felt a growing anger on behalf of this long-ago Clara. Orphaned, her uncle at war, and predatory relatives circling. No wonder she sought refuge in the library, in her drawings, in her letters from Thomas. October 1943. Around the time of the first letter Ellie read from Thomas. Clara seems withdrawn lately. Received another letter from Thomas, but also one from the Beaumonts that clearly upset her. She hides it well, but the worry lines are there. Poor child carries so much. Ellie flipped forward, searching for entries from late 1944, when Thomas's letters abruptly stopped in the hidden box. The entries continued detailing Clara's life, her library volunteering, her art classes, her quiet existence with the Weatherlys. But then a stark entry in November 1944. Terrible news today. A telegram arrived for Clara via the Beaumonts. Young Thomas Ashton, killed in action in France. Clara is utterly devastated, inconsolable. My heart breaks for her, such a waste. Thomas was dead, killed in action. Ellie sat back, the breath knocked out of her, tears stinging her eyes for the soldier she only knew through his hopeful, loving words and the young woman who had waited for him in vain, but that didn't explain the unsent letters hidden in the attic. Thomas had died in late 1944. The letters in the box dated up to that point. Why were his letters to her hidden away, unsent? Had the Beaumonts intercepted them? Or had Clara herself hidden them after his death, unable to bear reading them? Ellie, who frantically searched the diary for further clues. She found mentions of Clara's deep grief throughout the winter of 1944-45. Then, in the spring of 1945, a series of entries that made Ellie's blood run cold. March 1945. Beaumont's here again, insisting Clara, now nearly 18, sign papers, giving them control of her inheritance. They claim her uncle is still unreachable, likely missing in action himself. Clara refuses. Good girl. April 1945. Argument with the Beaumonts today. They threatened. Clara said she was unstable, might need institutional care if she didn't cooperate. Vile people. Told them to leave my house at once. May 1945. Clara seems terrified, says she feels watched. Packing a small bag, just in case. Trying to reassure her, but the Beaumonts are ruthless. Contacted Uncle John's lawyer. He advises, caution, says Beaumonts have been making inquiries about having Clara declared incompetent. And then a final chilling entry, dated May 18th, 1945. Clara is gone. Left a note saying she couldn't bear it anymore, felt unsafe. Begged us not to look for her, said she needed to disappear for her own safety. Took only a small bag, left everything else. Beaumonts arrived this morning asking for her, furious. Told them she'd run off, didn't know where. Don't think they believed me. Praying the child finds safety wherever she has run. Clara Beaumont hadn't just moved away. She had run away, disappeared, fearing for her safety and possibly her freedom, driven away by her predatory relatives after the devastating news of Thomas's death. And she had left almost everything behind, including, presumably, the box of Thomas's letters, hidden away in the attic for protection, or perhaps because they were too painful to carry. Ellie sat back, stunned, the pieces falling into place, forming a picture far more tragic and complex than she had imagined. Clara Beaumont, the quiet artist waiting for her soldier, had been orphaned, preyed upon, heartbroken, and finally forced to flee into obscurity. What had happened to her? Had she found safety? Had her uncle ever returned? And Ellie's own great-aunt Clara Weatherly. She had known this whole story, had tried to protect the young woman living under her roof. Had she ever heard from Clara Beaumont again? The hidden letters were not just a lost love story. They were the testament to a young life abruptly, perhaps violently, derailed. The revelations from Elizabeth Weatherly's diary left Ellie feeling deeply unsettled and profoundly connected to the young woman who had lived within these same walls 80 years ago. Clara Beaumont wasn't just a name on forgotten letters anymore. She was a real person, orphaned, artistic, deeply in love, and ultimately forced to flee from relatives who sought to control her inheritance, and perhaps even her freedom. The hidden box of Thomas's letters took on a new poignancy. They weren't just unsent, they were likely hidden by Clara herself before she disappeared, a precious, painful link to the love she had lost and the life she was forced to abandon. Ellie felt an almost fierce sense of obligation to uncover the rest of the story. What happened to Clara after she ran away in May 1945? Did the Beaumonts ever find her? Did her Uncle John, her legal guardian fighting overseas, ever return home? And Ellie's own great-grandmother, Elizabeth, had she ever heard from Clara again? The diary entries ended abruptly concerning Clara after her disappearance, focusing back on daily life and war news, leaving a frustrating void. Driven by these questions, Ellie turned her attention back to the contents of the attic and the downstairs study, searching now not just for clues about Clara Beaumont, but also about her guardian, Uncle John, whose last name wasn't mentioned in the diary, and the predatory Beaumonts. She spent days meticulously sifting through the remaining boxes in the attic. More old letters, mostly from distant Weatherly relatives, yielded nothing. She examined old financial records, tax documents, property deeds stored in filing cabinets in the study, searching for any mention of Clara's trust fund, Uncle John, or transactions involving the Beaumonts. It was slow, tedious work, like searching for a specific grain of sand on a vast beach. She found occasional references to her great-grandfather, paying household expenses related to Clara's stay, confirming her residence. She found correspondence regarding war bond drives and local volunteer efforts Elizabeth was involved in. But tangible clues about Clara's fate after May 1945, or the identity of the Beaumonts beyond their surname and Elizabeth's clear distrust, remained elusive. Frustrated by the lack of progress within the house, Ellie decided to broaden her search. Clara had volunteered at the hospital library. Perhaps there were records there. She also considered the Telfair Academy of Arts and Sciences, the local art museum and school where Thomas had encouraged Clara to take classes. Maybe they kept student records from that era. Her first stop was the Savannah Public Library System's main historical branch. Explaining she was researching family history related to her great-aunt's house on Willow Oak Square, she inquired about volunteer records from St. Joseph's Hospital, the main hospital during that era, during the war years. The archivist, a helpful woman with an encyclopedic knowledge of local history, was sympathetic but cautious. "Volunteer records from that specific period can be spotty, dear," she explained, peering over her glasses. "Especially during the war, things were chaotic, but we can certainly check the hospital archives index." After some searching through digitized records and old logbooks, they found it. Clara Beaumont listed as a regular volunteer library assistant at St. Joseph's from late 1943 through early 1945. Her address was listed as 17 Willow Oak Square, care of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Weatherly, Ellie's great-grandparents. There was no mention of the Beaumonts. There was also no record of her stopping her volunteer work abruptly. Her name simply disappeared from the logs after February 1945, a few months before Elizabeth noted her disappearance in the diary. Perhaps her grief over Thomas, combined with the pressure from the Beaumonts, had made continuing impossible even before she fled. It was another small piece, confirming her presence and activity, but offering no clue about her destination. Next, Ellie visited the Telfair Academy. She explained her interest in finding information about a young woman named Clara Beaumont, who might have taken art classes there around 1944-1945. The registrar was skeptical about finding records that old, but agreed to check their archives. Disappointingly, there was no record of a Clara Beaumont ever enrolling in classes. Perhaps Thomas's encouragement had come too late, or perhaps Clara, under the watchful eyes of the Beaumonts or consumed by worry and later grief, had never found the opportunity or the spirit to pursue her artistic inclinations formally. Ellie felt a pang of sadness for the lost potential, the stifled talent hinted at in Thomas's letters. Feeling slightly discouraged, Ellie returned to the quiet house on Willow Oak Square. She wandered through the rooms, trying to imagine Clara living there, reading in the parlor, perhaps sketching by the window where Ellie's own great-aunt Clara would later sit, receiving Thomas's letters with excitement, then later the devastating telegram. The house felt saturated with history, with unspoken stories. She decided to re-examine the box of letters itself. Maybe there was a clue she had missed. She sat at the antique writing desk in her great-aunt's bedroom, the box open before her. She carefully lifted out the bundles, tied with faded blue and pink ribbons. Most were from Thomas, filled with his longing and descriptions of the war, but tucked near the bottom, separate from Thomas's distinctive script, was a small, thin packet of different envelopes. These were addressed to Clara Beaumont at 17 Willow Oak Square, but the return addresses were local Savannah addresses, and the handwriting was different, spidery, cramped on some, bold and looping on others. They had been mailed. Faint postmarks from 1944 and early 1945 were visible. Ellie's heart beat faster. Were these letters from Clara, or letters to her from someone else? She carefully opened the first one. The return address was simply E. Henderson, Forsyth Park Apartments. The letter inside was brief, written in neat cursive. "Dearest Clara, just a note to say how much I enjoyed our chat at the library yesterday. You have such a wise head on young shoulders. Please don't let those dreadful Beaumonts bully you. Your uncle would be furious if he knew how they were behaving. Remember what I said. Hold fast. Let me know if you need anything at all. Your friend Edith Henderson." Dated January 1945. Edith Henderson. Ellie recognized the name instantly. Mr. Henderson, the elderly neighbor across the square. Edith must have been his wife, or perhaps his mother, and she knew Clara, knew about the Beaumonts and offered support. This was a tangible link. Ellie quickly opened another envelope from the same packet. This one had a different return address on Abercorn Street, and different handwriting, bolder, more masculine. "Clara, met with lawyer Thompson again regarding your Uncle John's affairs and the Beaumonts' inquiries. We are stalling them for now, citing lack of communication from the front. But they are persistent. Keep your chin up, my dear. Your Uncle John is a fighter and so are you. We'll check in again next week. Yours in solidarity, Robert W. Dated February 1945. Robert Weatherly, Ellie's great-grandfather. He was actively trying to protect Clara from the Beaumonts, working with her Uncle John's lawyer. But who was Uncle John and Lawyer Thompson? A third letter provided another piece. This one was shorter, the handwriting less refined. The return address a boarding house near the docks. Clara B. heard back from my cousin out west. She might have work for you, live-in, helping on their ranch way out in Wyoming. Quiet place? No one would find you there. Let me know if you want the contact info. Stay safe. Your pal, Maggie. Dated April 1945. Wyoming. A ranch. Had Clara been planning an escape even before she finally fled? Had she contacted this Maggie? It seemed Clara wasn't entirely alone. She had allies. Edith Henderson, Robert Weatherly, this friend Maggie, trying to help her navigate the treacherous situation with the Beaumonts after Thomas's death, seemed imminent or confirmed, but the final item in this small packet was the most chilling. It wasn't a letter. It was a small folded Western Union telegram dated May 17, 1945, the day before Elizabeth Weatherly noted Clara's disappearance in her diary. It was addressed to Clara Beaumont at 17 Willow Oak Square. The message was brief, stark, and terrifying. Expecting you, Fairview Sanitarium, May 20th. Stop cooperation advised. Stop all necessary arrangements. Made stop Beaumont Fairview Sanitarium. Ellie felt a cold dread creep up her spine. A quick search on her phone confirmed her fears. Fairview wasn't just a hospital. During that era, it was primarily known as a private mental institution, often used by wealthy families to discreetly house inconvenient relatives, sometimes against their will, especially women deemed hysterical or unstable. The Beaumonts hadn't just wanted Clara's inheritance, they were threatening to have her committed, likely citing her grief over Thomas and her refusal to cooperate as proof of instability. The telegram wasn't an invitation, it was a threat, a summons. No wonder. Clara had fled the very next day. She wasn't just running from financial predators, she was running to save herself from being locked away, silenced, her inheritance likely seized while she was declared incompetent. The pieces clicked together now, forming a terrifying picture of Clara's desperate flight. But the central mystery remained: what happened to her? Did she make it to Maggie's cousin in Wyoming? Did Uncle John ever return? Did the Beaumonts face any consequences? Ellie carefully placed the letters and the telegram back in the box. The story felt heavier now, darker. She looked around the quiet bedroom, suddenly feeling the presence of the young woman who had faced such fear within these walls. She felt an even stronger resolve to find out how Clara's story ended. Her next step, she decided, would be to talk to Mr. Henderson across the square. He was old enough. Maybe he remembered his mother, Edith, talking about the young woman who lived with the Weatherlys during the war. Maybe he held the key to Clara's fate. The next morning dawned bright and crisp, a welcome change from the previous day's gloom. Ellie felt a nervous energy as she prepared to approach Mr. Henderson. She clutched the small packet of letters addressed to Clara, especially the one from Edith Henderson and the telegram from the Beaumonts, feeling they were her tangible link, her proof, her reason for intruding on potentially painful memories. She waited until mid-morning, when she saw Mr. Henderson out in his small front garden, meticulously tending to his late-blooming camellias, his movements slow but deliberate. Taking a deep breath, Ellie crossed the quiet square, the cobblestones cool beneath her feet. "Mr. Henderson," she called softly as she reached his low garden gate. He looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun with a weathered hand, a welcoming smile spreading across his deeply lined face. "Ah, Miss Vance, Ellie. Good morning to you. Beautiful day after the dampness, isn't it?" "It really is," Ellie agreed, returning his smile. "Mr. Henderson, I know this might seem like an odd question, and please tell me if I'm overstepping, but I was hoping I could ask you about something related to my great-aunt Clara's house, and perhaps your family's connection to it, many years ago." Mr. Henderson straightened up slowly, setting down his trowel, his expression shifting from neighborly warmth to cautious curiosity. "My family's connection? Well, my mother, Edith, was dear friends with Elizabeth Weatherly. Your great-grandmother? Knew Clara Weatherly too, of course, though not as well. What did you want to know, dear? Ellie hesitated, then decided directness was best. I was sorting through things in the attic, she began, and I found some old letters, addressed to a young woman named Clara Beaumont, who seemed to be living at 17 Willow Oak Square during the war, around 1943 to 1945. At the name Clara Beaumont, Mr. Henderson's friendly demeanor vanished instantly. A shadow crossed his face, his eyes clouding over with a mixture of sadness and something else, perhaps old anger. He leaned heavily on the garden gate, looking past Ellie towards her great-aunt's house across the square. Clara Beaumont, he murmured, the name tasting like dust and memory on his tongue. Haven't thought about that poor girl in decades. Yes, I remember her. Just a child, really, when she came to live with the Weatherlys. Orphaned, you know. Her parents died in that awful flu epidemic just before the war started. Yes, my great-grandmother's diary mentioned that, Ellie confirmed gently. And that her Uncle John was her guardian, but he was away fighting. Mr. Henderson nodded grimly. Major Jonathan Beaumont, good man, salt of the earth. Lawyer before the war, went overseas early on, special operations, highly classified stuff. Left his niece Clara in the care of the Weatherlys, trusted them, completely, and put his cousins, Walter and Mildred Beaumont, in charge of managing Clara's inheritance until she came of age, or he returned. He spat the name Beaumont like something foul. Worst decision he ever made. My great-grandmother's diary mentioned she didn't trust them, Ellie said, pulling out the small packet of letters. I found these too, Mr. Henderson. This one is from your mother, Edith. She carefully handed him the letter Edith had written to Clara. He took it with a slightly trembling hand, his eyes scanning the familiar, neat cursive. He read it slowly, his expression softening with poignant recognition. Yes, he whispered. That's Mother's hand, all right. She worried terribly about Clara, called the Beaumonts vultures in mourning clothes. He looked up at Ellie, his eyes sharp again. Those Beaumonts, they were distant cousins, always sniffing around for money. They saw Clara's inheritance, sizable apparently from her parents' shipping business, as their own ticket. They systematically tried to isolate her, control her, after her Uncle John was reported missing in action in late '44. Missing in action? Ellie asked. Not killed. Missing, Mr. Henderson confirmed. Presumed dead by many, especially the Beaumonts, who couldn't wait to get their hands on Clara's money. They started pressuring her relentlessly, trying to get her to sign documents. Your great-grandfather Robert, bless his soul, tried to intervene, worked with John Beaumont's law partner. Old Mr. Thompson. Lawyer Thompson? Ellie interrupted, remembering the name from Robert Weatherly's letter. That's the one. Tried to protect Clara's interests, delay things until there was definitive word on Major Beaumont. But Walter and Mildred Beaumont were ruthless. Mr. Henderson's face hardened again. They started spreading rumors Clara was unstable, grieving excessively for that young soldier she was writing to. Thomas Ashton, was it? Ellie nodded numbly, retrieving the telegram from the packet. They did more than spread rumors, Mr. Henderson. Look at this. She handed him the chilling Western Union message. He read the stark words, Expecting you, Fairview Sanitarium. May 20th, stop. Cooperation advised. Stop all necessary arrangements made. Stop Beaumont. Mr. Henderson let out a sharp, angry hiss. The devils, he breathed, his knuckles white as he gripped the fragile paper. Fairview, they were going to lock her away, just like Mother feared, declare her incompetent and steal everything. He looked at Ellie, his eyes blazing with righteous, decades-old anger. So that's why she ran. Yes, Ellie confirmed quietly. My great-grandmother wrote in her diary that Clara left the very next day, May 18th, 1945, leaving just a note saying she had to disappear for her safety. She paused. Did they ever hear from her again, Mr. Henderson? Did anyone? The anger faded from Mr. Henderson's face, replaced by a profound sadness. He sighed heavily, leaning more on the gate, looking across at the house again as if seeing ghosts in its windows. No, he said softly. Not directly. Not for a long, long time. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The Beaumonts raised hell, of course. Accused the Weatherlys of hiding her, even involved the police briefly. But there was no trace. Clara vanished completely. Elizabeth and Robert Weatherly were heartbroken, worried sick. My mother, Edith, was too. They feared the Beaumonts might have found her, or that something worse had happened. And her Uncle John? Ellie prompted gently. Was he really missing? Mr. Henderson shook his head slowly. That was the other tragedy, compounding Clara's fear. Major Beaumont was missing. In action for several months after the Battle of the Bulge. But he wasn't dead. He was severely wounded, recovering in a field hospital, unable to communicate for a long time due to the chaos at the end of the war in Europe. He continued, his voice low. By the time Major Beaumont was finally repatriated, and well enough, to take charge of his affairs in late 1945, Clara was long gone. The Beaumonts, facing legal challenges from John's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, now that John was back, quickly claimed ignorance of Clara's whereabouts, pretending they too were worried. Mr. Henderson snorted derisively. Liars and thieves, the pair of them. John Beaumont eventually managed to regain control of Clara's remaining inheritance, what the cousins hadn't already siphoned off through management fees. But he couldn't find Clara. He searched for her for years, Mr. Henderson said, his voice filled with old sadness. Hired private investigators, followed leads, checked records across the country. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished off the face of the earth. He never forgave himself for leaving her vulnerable, never forgave the Beaumonts for their cruelty. Died a bachelor about 20 years ago, always wondering what became of his niece. Ellie felt a wave of profound sorrow for Clara, for Thomas, for Uncle John, a whole family destroyed by war, grief and greed. So, no one ever knew what happened to Clara Beaumont, she asked quietly, dreading the answer. Mr. Henderson looked down at his weathered hands resting on the gate. Not for certain, he admitted, but my mother, Edith, she always held on to a sliver of hope. He looked back up at Ellie, a thoughtful expression dawning. Wait a minute. You said you inherited the house from your great-aunt Clara. Clara Weatherly? Ellie nodded. Yes. She never married again after her first husband died young, lived there alone for decades. Mr. Henderson frowned, puzzling something out. Clara Weatherly. She inherited the house after Elizabeth and Robert passed, right? Lived there all those years. Quiet woman, kept to herself mostly, just like Arthur Pendleton upstairs. He trailed off, then his eyes widened slightly. Good Lord, he whispered. All these years, could it be possible? Could what be possible, Mr. Henderson? Ellie asked, her heart starting to pound. Clara Weatherly, he said slowly, looking intently at Ellie. She was Elizabeth and Robert's daughter, yes, but she was adopted. Ellie stared at him, stunned. Adopted? My great-aunt Clara was adopted? She knew so little about her family history beyond her immediate grandparents. Yes, Mr. Henderson confirmed, nodding decisively now. Adopted shortly after the war ended. Around late 1945, early 1946. I think, my mother mentioned it once years ago, said the Weatherlys had always wanted more children but couldn't, and then suddenly this quiet, sad-eyed little girl arrived. They never spoke much about where she came from, just that she was family. Who needed a home? He looked towards the house again, then back at Ellie, his eyes wide with dawning realization. Ellie, he said, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. Your great-aunt Clara Weatherly, the woman who lived her whole quiet life in that house, the woman who left it to you, I think she was Clara Beaumont. The possibility hung in the air, stunning, terrifying, yet somehow making a strange, heartbreaking kind of sense. Clara Beaumont hadn't vanished entirely. She had, perhaps with her great-aunt and great-uncle's help, simply become someone else. She erased her past, adopted their name, lived a quiet, hidden life within the very walls that held the memories of her lost love and her terrifying ordeal, never revealing her true identity, carrying her secrets silently for over 70 years. And the box of Thomas's letters hidden in the attic wasn't just a memento of lost love. It was the hidden core of a stolen identity, a life lived under an assumed name. Mr. Henderson's words echoed in the quiet Savannah air, heavy with the weight of decades of hidden history. Your great-aunt Clara Weatherly's, I think she was Clara Beaumont. Ellie stood frozen by the garden gate, staring across the square at the familiar, elegant facade of 17 Willow Oak Square. Her house, great-aunt Clara's house, Clara Beaumont's house. The pieces clicked into place with a dizzying, heartbreaking resonance. The quiet solitude of her great-aunt, the lack of personal photographs, the intense privacy, the way she never spoke of her youth or family beyond the Weatherlys who raised her, the faint, lingering sadness Ellie sometimes glimpsed behind her polite reserve during childhood visits. It all made a terrible kind of sense now. Clara Weatherly hadn't just inherited a house, she had inherited a sanctuary, a place where she could disappear, shedding the identity tied to trauma, grief, and fear, adopting the name of the family who had offered her refuge. Adopted, Ellie murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. All. There she is. No one in the family ever mentioned it. We just assumed she was Aunt Clara, quiet Aunt Clara. People kept secrets back then, dear, Mr. Henderson said gently, his own eyes misty now. Especially about things deemed difficult or potentially scandalous. The Weatherlys likely protected her identity fiercely, perhaps even from other family members to keep the Beaumonts from ever finding her, and Clara herself. Well, after what she endured, maybe becoming Clara Weatherly was the only way she felt she could survive, could build any kind of life. Ellie thought of the box of letters upstairs, Thomas Ashton's words filled with love and longing for Clara. Beaumont at this very address. Had great-aunt Clara kept them hidden all these years, unable to destroy them but perhaps too pained to revisit them? Were they a secret reminder of the love she lost and the identity she sacrificed? "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Ellie said softly, her mind still reeling but her path forward becoming clearer. "Thank you for sharing that. It explains a lot. Just glad the truth finally surfaced after all this time," he sighed. "Poor girl. Poor Major Beaumont, too. And that young soldier. Tragic all around." He patted Ellie's arm kindly. "You let me know if you need anything else, dear." Ellie walked back across the square towards the house, seeing it now with entirely new eyes. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a repository of secrets, a testament to resilience and loss. Back inside, she went straight to the small downstairs study and retrieved her great-grandmother Elizabeth Weatherly's diaries once more. She searched the entries from late 1945 and early 1946, looking for any hint, any coded reference to Clara Beaumont's return or transformation into Clara Weatherly. She found it, tucked away in an entry from February 1946. "Our dear C arrived safely last week. Looks thin and worn, but the light is slowly returning to her eyes. The necessary arrangements were made quietly through Mr. Thompson. No one else need ever know the details. She will be safe here now. Start anew. Our daughter. Our daughter." The simple words confirmed it, beyond doubt. Elizabeth and Robert Weatherly had likely helped Clara Beaumont disappear safely, perhaps facilitating her move, maybe even to Wyoming with Maggie's help. For a time until the immediate threat from the Beaumonts subsided after Uncle John's return and legal intervention. Then they had welcomed her back, not as a ward, but had legally, secretly adopted her as their own daughter, giving her their name, their protection, allowing her to bury Clara Beaumont and the trauma associated with that name. Ellie felt tears welling up again, this time not just for the tragedy, but for the quiet strength and love shown by her great-grandparents in protecting the orphaned girl, and for her great-aunt Clara, who had lived her entire adult life carrying the weight of that hidden past, that lost love, that erased identity. No wonder she had seemed so solitary, so private. Ellie went back upstairs to the bedroom and sat before the wooden box containing Thomas Ashton's letters. She lifted the lid, the scent of old paper rising to meet her. She looked at the neat stacks tied with faded ribbons. These weren't just letters to a stranger anymore. They were letters to her own great-aunt, written by the young man Clara had loved and lost so tragically. What should she do with them? They felt too sacred, too personal to simply keep stored away, their story silenced again. Clara, Both Claras deserved better. Thomas deserved to have his words acknowledged. Ellie spent the next few days carefully reading every single letter Thomas had written, from his initial hopeful dispatches to his later war-weary accounts, all filled with his unwavering love for Clara. She handled the brittle pages with care, piecing together their story, feeling Thomas's longing, his fear, his determination to return home to the girl waiting for him at 17 Willow Oak Square. She also found, tucked beneath Thomas's letters, a small handful of delicate, dried flowers, perhaps pressed violets or pansies, and one more photograph she hadn't noticed before. It showed Thomas Ashton, young and handsome in his uniform, smiling broadly, his arm around Clara Beaumont. Clara looked radiant, happy, her face tilted up towards his, love shining in her eyes. It was a picture taken before the war, before the loss, before the fear. A snapshot of a future that never came to be. Seeing them together, so young and hopeful, solidified Ellie's decision. Their story shouldn't remain hidden. She started by contacting the local historical society in Savannah, sharing the outlines of the story and the existence of the letters, emphasizing the connection to the Weatherly family and the historic house. They were immediately intrigued, recognizing the potential significance for local wartime history. Working with the Historical Society and later with sensitive guidance from historians at the National World War II Museum, after verifying Thomas Ashton's service records and confirming his posthumous decorations, earned partly for actions described, albeit vaguely in his letters, Ellie began the careful process of archiving and transcribing Thomas's letters. She made sure Clara's privacy, even in death, was respected. The focus wasn't on exposing the adoption or the trauma with the Beaumonts, but on honoring the wartime correspondence, the story of love and endurance across continents, and the experience of a soldier and the young woman who waited. An article was eventually published, sensitively written, in a historical journal, and picked up by the local Savannah newspaper. Echoes from the front, weeded letters, found in historic Savannah home, tell tale of love and loss. It spoke of Thomas Ashton's service, quoted brief non-private excerpts from his letters describing wartime life, mentioned his love for a Savannah girl named Clara, and noted the letters were found preserved in the home now owned by his beloved's distant relative. It framed their story as a poignant example of the countless personal dramas played out against the backdrop of the war. The article generated quiet interest. People remembered the Weatherlys. Some older residents vaguely recalled hearing whispers about the orphaned girl who lived with them during the war. The story resonated, a small piece of local history brought gently to light. For Ellie, the process felt like fulfilling a promise across time. She donated the original letters and the photograph of Thomas and Clara to the Historical Society's archives, ensuring their preservation. She kept the small wooden box and the dried flowers, placing them on the mantelpiece in the parlor, a quiet tribute. She decided to stay in Savannah, in the house on Willow Oak Square. Sorting through her great-aunt's belongings felt different, now imbued with a deeper understanding. She found Clara Weatherly's own hidden sketchbooks filled with beautiful drawings, landscapes, flowers, portraits, revealing the artistic talent Thomas had recognized, a talent Clara had continued to nurture privately throughout her long, quiet life. The house no longer felt just old. It felt layered, filled with the echoes of those who had lived and loved and endured within its walls. Ellie found herself sitting sometimes in the armchair by the fourth-floor window, looking out at the sycamore tree, wondering if Aunt Clara Beaumont, had found some measure of peace there over the years. She never found definitive proof of what happened to the Beaumont cousins, though she assumed Uncle John and his lawyer likely dealt with them legally upon his return. Some secrets remained buried, but the core story, the love between Thomas and Clara, was no longer forgotten. Ellie felt her own roots settling into the rich Savannah soil, connected now not just to a house, but to the resilience, sacrifice, and quiet endurance of those who came before her. The forgotten letters in the attic hadn't just revealed a secret. They had given Ellie a deeper understanding of family, history, and the enduring power of love stories, even those hidden by time. Ellie's Discovery brought a hidden love story to light after decades of silence. What did you think of Thomas and Clara's story and Ellie's decision? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of history, love and secrets touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe for more compelling narratives that connect the past to the present. Thank you for watching.